All right, everybody. First of all, thanks so much for joining us. This is the fourth and final webinar in a series of food talks. My name is Mustafa Koita. I'm the founder and CEO of Koita Foods. And the previous episodes were very interesting. We talked about the new normal for consumers, work redefined. We talked about a bunch of HR issues. And last week was called Original Marketing Plan Scrap, where we talked about how people's marketing plans have changed rapidly through the Corona and COVID times. Today is called Making Stuff Work, and it's really about operations and supply chain. And I think in all of our businesses, we always see the consumers see the front side of the business. They see the PR, the marketing, the salesmanship that goes behind brands. But sometimes they don't remember what happens to get, let's say, the food on the table. And that's all the operations and supply chain and logistics. So with us today, we've got some really great speakers, and I'll just introduce them. First is Bilal Balut. He's the founder and CEO of B&B, which is a conglomerate slash manufacturer. They produce a lot of different foods like chocolates, Mediterranean sweets, and healthy foods. They also own some brands like Freaking Healthy. They produce for other brands like Fade Fit Kids. And then recently they just landed a contract in the United States with Walmart and has been doing a really great job in his space. Olivia, who was inspired by her French grandfather and Nordic roots, founded Hello Chef, which is a very famous prep meal plan that's been growing, I have to say, rapidly, especially over the last few months. They're in fact the fastest growing home delivery and prep meals company right now in the UAE. I've also used them before, and they've made me look good in the kitchen. That's the last time you'll hear that joke, Olivia, by the time now that's the fourth webinar. Dinesh Pagrani is the director and third generation owner of one of the oldest retail chains in the region, Choitrams. He started his career at the bottom of the food chain, let's say at Choitrams, so all the different facets of their business, which includes not just retail, but also a very big distribution company. And he's been doing a great job in his industry and has a lot of great insight from the retail perspective. Last but not least, we've got our celebrity chef, Chef Izu, who is one of the key chefs who founded LPM, Le Sur. He's now heavily involved in Gaia, Lighthouse, Kareen, and a few other establishments. Man, I can't even keep the list. Izu, but every time any of us meet him, we gain a few kilos because his food is just amazing. So thank you guys all for being here. Are you guys ready for series number 4 now? You guys ready to go? All right, cool. So listen, during the Corona time, the supply chain was affected in a lot of ways, and I think consumers saw stockouts, but as either a manufacturer, delivery service, high-end fine dining restaurant or a brand, there are a lot of things happening on the logistics side and demand planning that a lot of people don't think of. So what I wanted to go around and just ask you guys about is, how was your supply chain most affected? What was like the top 1 or 2 things that happened to you, and how did you end up resolving them within the last few months? So, Bilal, you're a manufacturer and you're importing goods from all over the world. How would you say your supply chain was affected the most during the Corona time?
So you know what, it was really tricky at the beginning because if you remember when the lockdown started, it didn't start here as fast as it started in Europe. So when we saw because we import a lot of our ingredients from different parts of Europe, and when we saw everything closing down, we started expecting that freight would go up, and we doubled our imports just to stay on the safe side. Now the crazy thing is, by the time we made all these deals, then the lockdown came here, which meant that demand went down, which meant that we ended up with twice as much inventory as we had hoped to achieve. And because of the difference in timing, it was very hard to get this right. And that, of course, affects your cash flow at the end of the day. There's a way out of it. I mean, at the end of the day, that means we don't have to do much purchasing in the next 3 months. But I have to say it was very challenging in the beginning because it's very hard to predict. You always get it way out of scale. The best you can do is, I'd say you have to take a decision. Would you rather be out of stock or would you rather be overstocked?
Yeah, oh, that's an interesting question. Dinesh, on the retail side, I mean, you were dealing directly with consumers, but you're also importing a lot and getting stuff from local distributors. How would you say your supply chain was affected? And how did you deal with a lot of stockouts? Because there was a period where there was tons of stuff that just wasn't on the shelves when it needed to be.
Yeah, so I mean, so we had specific out of stocks happening in fresh, meats, fish, fruit and veg specifically, which, I mean, fresh is the largest component to our business because in between there were kind of rumors. And look, the fish market did close down. So there's only we were only getting farmed fish, which like some things like sea bass and stuff and sea bream, which are farmed by a few individuals here and a little bit of imported stuff. But your local sherries, your hamurs, those kind of went out of stock for a long time. Instead of fresh prawns, we were largely selling a lot of defrosted prawns. In terms of the grocery and FMCG side, largely, I mean, we were largely okay, I would say, to begin with. I mean, you definitely saw pockets of out of stocks. Most of our local suppliers kind of had sufficient levels of stocks because, I mean, generally people keep enough of a buffer. And by the time, that demand was realized, there was enough of a lead time to try to ensure at that point you kind of have enough in 2 months' time. So I don't think in the grocery side we saw huge out of stocks, but there have been elements of out of stocks, still persisting.
Like how would you rank it? I mean, when COVID hit, what would you say were the top 1, 2, or 3 items that were out of stock the most, that you had the biggest challenges with?
Are you talking across the whole store or just fresh?
Yeah, across the whole store.
So fresh was definitely the largest component. I mean, because for a supermarket, about 12 to 15% of your sales come from specifically produce. So produce is where we probably saw a few challenges to begin with. But I mean, today, if somebody can't pick up Koita almond milk, they'll happily go to another almond milk brand to pick up. So
that's a horrible example, by the way. I think you should. Could you come up with anything else? But let me ask you Bilal's sort of point. I mean, in this time when you did stock out of certain things as a retailer, do you think it's better to be out of stock and, taking sort of the conservative demand planning route, or is it better to be overstock? I mean, do you guys have a position on that when you're formulating?
I mean, I would say we would generally try to now overstock because, even when you say overstock, you're in essence beefing up your orders. You don't really know how much of your orders are also going to be fulfilled. So, I mean, just if I take in a random example here, just say if I import 3 different pasta brands, one from the UK, one from US, and one from Australia, and generally across 3 brands, I normally sell, 2,000 cases a month, random figure out there. I don't necessarily know how much fulfillment I'm going to get, say, from the US or from Australia. So we in essence did this. We beefed up our orders from all various territories for the same category of products, assuming that we wouldn't get a sort of perfect.
And Dinesh, for someone who's listening, I mean, what's sort of been your rule of thumb for when you say beefing up your orders? If you were buying, I mean, how much kind of buffer do you guys usually try and keep nowadays? Seeing what's happened with COVID, do you have a couple weeks stock, a couple months stock? I mean, does it depend? What's sort of your rule of thumb?
Generally, in our imports, we keep around 6 to 8 weeks sort of stock. Now, obviously, our inventory was eating a lot in the sort of beginning of the situation, but it was very hard it is a little bit hard to demand forecasts going, especially in the summer months where we kind of anticipate our business going down by around 30% when everyone kind of goes away for vacations and stuff like that. So this is a year where it was a little bit unsure. People, I mean, this is going back in March. Are people going to be around? Are they not going to be around? Are people going to be in jobs? Are they not going to be in jobs? So I think there's still a lot of unknown, and so it's not, you can never really fully get the demand forecasting right. I think there will still be a lot of element of unknown up until probably about September.
But look, I want to add something here, Koita. So when we're looking at the question, you also have to look at, I think the key element here is cash flow, right? So if your cash flow allows you to overstock, obviously that'll always be the right answer in such a situation. But if your cash flow doesn't, that's the tricky one, right? So how affected was your business? Was it affected by 20, 30%? Or was it affected by 70, 80%? Because at 70, 80% and you're overstocked, right now we see a lot of distributors here who are carrying, let's say the ones mainly affected are the ones in the HoReCa division. And because HoReCa is down by way above 50%, holding on to inventory with the packaging, we talked about the packaging before, that doesn't allow you to sell into modern trade or to sell directly to consumers. Overstocking that is the danger, because as you come closer to the expiry date on these, you'll find it harder and harder to liquidate. So
yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point when you talk about HoReCa. I want to ask actually Izu, since he's in the HoReCa business. And sorry, just to make one little comment before we get to you, Chef. If there's any listeners who have any questions during the entire webinar, please feel free to hit the Q&A button or in the chat. Just put your question there, and then I'll address it to the audience. But Izu, I mean, listen, you know, Bilal brings up a good point. You know, I mean, HoReCa business basically shut down for 2-3 minutes. I'm sure you guys had stock, you know, when things shut down. How did you guys manage it? What did you do with all that extra food? And I would assume a lot of it was fresh. So what happened there? I'm just curious. You got to unmute.
These modern technology, I only know how to use a knife. Anyway, no, but as you know, fresh doesn't last. I mean, it has a certain lifespan of a few days, and then that's it. So when I mean, it was abruptly we closed because we didn't plan for this, and even we have like a certain, because some of our product comes from Greece, comes from most of it comes from Europe. So you kind of anticipate what you're gonna sell. So all the fish orders and everything, where we kind of always say, let's buy a certain. We used to go through a ton of fish a week in Gaia. So when we close it abruptly, what you do with it? I mean, fish, you can't freeze it. Yes, you can, but you can't really sell it in the same manner. So all of our fresh product went to the staff. I mean, at the end of the day, we still had people to feed. We had people to that can use it.
Yeah, and so, Chef, I mean, has what's happened? It sounds like a lot of it had to go to waste. I mean, so what did you do with it? Did you give it away, or?
No, we used it for the staff. I mean, the staff took it. So I wouldn't count it as waste. It is waste as in that we didn't make money from it. Yes, you can use that, but it wasn't like put down the bin.
Yeah.
It was put into good use. But I mean, this whole situation has given us a lot of challenges, and also to me, it got me more creative in a sense, because now open up again, the logistic channel is not as fluent or fluid as it used to be. So we have shortages. The suppliers have learned their lesson. They got burnt. A lot of the suppliers lost a lot of money because they had a lot of product waiting to deliver to us. So now they have minimal stock or even no stock. So we have to turn to local produce, local suppliers. But the taste is not the same. So you have to change your recipes. You have to adapt to the new produces. So it got us creative. I mean, because the way I always say, the recipe doesn't make itself. We make the recipe. We got to taste it to adjust it. So it's still in the same direction. So it got us more in tune into what we're using, and basically more grateful as well, because at the end of the day, you take a lot of things for granted, and that it will come, it will be here. You make plans, and it will come. So nowadays, we're grateful that we've kind of re-engaged with our creative side, because even the menu had to change. We had to downsize.
It sounds like you kind of reverse engineered your recipes around, let's call it the new, more local supply chain. I'm just wondering, since you did that, did the customers have any issues with that? Were there any complaints saying, hey, you know, I wanted this type of tasting fish versus that, or any issues like that?
No, but I mean, a lot of the customers said that the recipes are even better. Maybe because they haven't had it for a long time. Maybe that is why. But the thing is, if you're attached to your product, you know how it should taste, how the direction should be. So you can adequately adapt to the change, and I think that's what all of us have to adapt with the consequences of what's happening around us. We have to.
And how are you finding? Yeah, how are you finding the local supply chain? Are they able to give you enough stock? Are they able to turn around, you know, the turnaround times just as efficient? I mean, are there any other challenges with their supply chains?
I mean, you have to be ready to accept certain things. I mean, when you used to order things this size or that size, and you get it this size, so you have to adapt. You can't stay still. You have to be relevant to today. If you don't, you be a dinosaur. So, and also now, one of the things that I'm also looking into is fish from from the seas in Ras Al Khaimah. I never knew that Ras Al Khaimah had the deepest part of the sea. It's next to the ocean, so the fish is much better. It's colder waters. I didn't know that. I didn't find out because now I had an issue with getting supply.
Okay.
So it got me to understand the environment I'm living in. So there's always a positive to everything. You just have to be positive in your outlook.
So if you're producing locally, is there any chance that my billet guy is going to be a little bit less this time?
Oh, come on. You get looked after. Don't you go there, buddy.
I'm waiting for the day when you take entertainer, by the way. Then, you know, I'll be there every day. So let's see.
I've actually got a question for Isu, because I'm a pescatarian myself, and grew up in the UK, and I always kind of found, like, you know, as you would know as well, Isu, like the haddock and the cod and the plaice and the turbot, what you get in the UK. The local fish didn't ever really fully match up in terms of taste, in terms of quality. But do you really think, I mean, that recreate at a certain level?
No, but you know, I have been very quietly surprised that in some of the local fish is even better because it's so fresh. Because the reason why a lot of local fish don't get the same kind of stardom as the fish that comes from Europe. That already is a mental thing, because you think fish that from over there or from there is, oh wow, they got star, they got a passport, they got all this kind of thing, and you presume it to be more luxurious, and you never give, because everything that you grow locally is never always considered the same value. You always think the grass is always better over there because
the grass is always greener.
It is because even when I was working in Greece, they used to take my advice like God. And any Greek chef that used to say something, it was like nothing. And some of the Greek chefs that were saying something, I used to learn from them because they had knowledge about what they were talking about. Because always the outsiders used to have better comments.
Yeah, I think Izu, to your point. Sorry, just to move on to your point. I think you know, a fish doesn't need a passport to taste good, I think is one of the big takeaways. So, hey guys, I just want to shift the conversation a little bit to Olivier's industry, which is has been B2C prep meals. You also do need a lot of product from different sorts of suppliers. And I know that you grew a lot in the last couple of months. So how would you say your supply chain has been affected the most? What were your biggest challenges in the last couple of months during COVID, and how did you overcome them?
So obviously the challenges are the same. It's the availability of products from the US and Europe, so sea and air products. We've always kind of tried to get quite a bit locally. And I saw one question pop up in the chat box is, one of the things that we've really put a lot of effort on recently is the relationship with the suppliers. And so for sure with us, because we ended up growing a lot, we had a lot of unavailable products, and we promise our customers weeks in advance that they're going to have something specific, right? Because our customers can choose up to 4 weeks in advance what they're going to eat. So we can't go 2 days before saying, sorry, Mustafa, you know, we don't have salmon or we don't have this, because you have already locked your mind to it. So obviously that brings other challenges that we've had to face, mostly to do with communication and then figuring out some of the processes internally for that. But in terms of product, I think what saved us, and Bilal mentioned the cash flow issue here, what saved us really was the fact that we had many credit accounts with our suppliers. Because what we started doing when we realized that, you know, there's lockdowns in Europe, there's lockdowns here, we started just buying 4 weeks of stock in advance. We don't usually have stock because our menus change every week. Every week we'll have different ingredients. So we can't really stock up a lot of inventory apart from some basic dry goods and long shelf life items. But in terms of the cash flow, what was great is that we already had some existing.
So it sounds like you increased your buffers as well. And what would you say you increased your buffers to? What was it before and what was it now? Kind of as a rule of thumb, like how many weeks of inventory were you holding?
So we've gone back to a more steady routine. So we've gone back to a more or less, 1 week in advance ordering. But what we've started doing is building these relationships with our suppliers. So we've improved our forecast a lot in the last couple of months. We've hired into a data team as well, just to be able to work on the forecasting much better. And now we go and we book products. So if things we know that they come by sea and they'll need about 3 months, we go in advance to make sure we book it. So for sure and that's where forecasting comes to play. And it's always going to be risky. What's good for us is that we know what our recipes are going to be in 2 months or 3 months time. So that's kind of like something that we've had to work towards building that capability for us. But
it sounds like when you ramped up the inventories, I think the takeaway is your suppliers ramped up your credit as well at the same time. I think they saw the opportunity, correct?
Yes, I think our numbers looked good, so it was easy for people to jump on board. It wasn't everybody's numbers looking like that, so we were lucky in that way.
You said that, sorry, Koita. So when we look at suppliers, okay, this is actually interesting, and there's a message in the group talking about how you forecast with suppliers and how the relationships changed. But I think that, in Olivia's case, she's performing well. Suppliers can't only see her in terms of the previous credit that they had given her. Now that they have extra inventory they want to deplete, they'll go for the safe options of the clients that they don't mind raising that credit limit, even if they haven't insured it to that amount and so on. But I think I'll tell you, we saw two different suppliers and two different clients. So obviously every single company held on to cash during these last few months, some more than others. Some did it rationally, so they kept enough for them to stay afloat to pay their salaries, and then they paid the rest to suppliers. The others just didn't pay anyone. They were like, okay, well, we're closing down and we'll just hold the cash and then we open up again, That is what I would say is a big part of why a lot of companies went down, because their clients had the money. And again, if you look at the supply chain, I say it goes all the way up to it starts with the manufacturer, then to the distributor, then the customer. So if the customer hasn't paid the distributor hasn't paid the supplier. So I'd say that was very irresponsible from those companies, because it was just a radical decision. But obviously you had to hold on to some. And if you look from the supplier point of view, you had the ones that, for example, us, were like, look, we're going to pay everyone X% of what we owe them, but continue supplying and throughout this time. And if you do, we continue paying. And then, when our clients open up and they pay us, we'll pay you the full amount. If you stop supplying us and you say you want the full amount first closed in before, I'm being very honest here, then we're saying, well, we won't pay you now, because what you're doing is you're disrupting our business. We'd rather take our money and pay the guys who are still supplying us. Now that's also very tricky for the suppliers, right? Because it's a call you have to make. Do you keep betting with the same client or not? And this goes.
It sounds like there's actually two parallel supply chains. There's the product supply chain, which has to do with logistics, but there's the financial supply chain on where you're going to manage your cash risk, I guess. So, Bilal, that's a really good point. What would you say after seeing what you've seen? What are your kind of lessons learned now? What philosophy would you take forward if you're in a similar situation now? How would you place your bets, basically?
So I'll tell you one on the supply side. So let's look at ourselves as the middleman. Okay, we manufacture, we have our clients, we have our suppliers. And from the supplier point of view, lessons learned there is one, have really good relationships, because what saved us a lot is the relationships we had where, I could call up some of our suppliers and just say, listen, you might not be receiving your full amount now, but keep supplying us, everything will be okay. Two, have plan Bs. because having one supplier for a product, that's a recipe for disaster in a time like this. So in all cases, we had, you know, 2 suppliers, we're okay. In the cases where we had 1, we suffered. And the client side, I'd say, you know, we would never go back to the way we were before, where we basically, you know, we funded clients, and, you know, I wouldn't say carelessly, everything was insured and so on, but we did it in such a manner that when times like this happen, if they shut down, we're frozen. So I guess our credit limits, our deposits, and you know, upfront payments the policy has changed from now on. So I would definitely manage that better.
Yeah, I think you know, it's interesting in terms of how you engage with the client. I mean, on our side, we actually had a number of client engagement issues during Corona. One was we were out of stock for a long period. And number 2 is we had some receivables issues, especially on the HoReCa side. So we had to engage both those sectors in slightly different ways. We had to be very patient on the HoReCa side and understanding on very long ARs. But on the retail side, you know, in sort of Dinesh's industry, but because we were stocking out, we actually started over communicating our stock out issues so that the retailers could plan around our stock outs and our eventual stock in date. So we ended up using it as an opportunity to build, you know, I think a little bit more supply chain communication with the retailers, because obviously they have an amount of shelf space that they want to allocate for certain items, and they want to maximize, you know, their throughput. So I'm just curious, Dinesh, on your side, on the retail side, were you engaging with some of your supply chain folks when you did have stockouts or didn't have stockouts?
Yes, I mean, for us, it's you know, it's quite diverse because you know we've got the retail and wholesale business as well. So one was try to ensure stock, not just for our you know, retail customers, but also for our wholesale customers as well. So even though today, you know, being a retailer, I still supply to, you know, a lot of my retail competitors, but they're in essence my wholesale customers. So, you know, a lot of them, you know, initially a lot of people started again bumping up their local purchase orders, but you know, we had to kind of be you know, be careful with this stock and kind of, you know, not just give it all to 1 or 2 clients or customers. So we had to kind of communicate that from the wholesale front that, look, you know, we can't just release all our entire stock to you. When it comes to the retail side, I think consumers are pretty, you know, or very well tuned to kind of understanding why an out of stock situation was happening. The other side, when it came to the people who help coordinate our imports, you know, at source, whether it's the UK, US, you know, each one of these countries had a, you know, a very unique set of problems, should I say. You know, a country like India, it's been very hard to get stock from because, you know, that you probably have one of the most severest lockdowns and one of the harshest social distancing measures put in place in the factories. Whereas in Europe and the West, it's wouldn't say as severe as that. So, you know, there's been a decent continuation of supply coming out of Europe.
Another thing that we noticed in the last couple of months is, at least on the freight and logistics side, I don't know if you guys who import noticed it, but a lot of the containers coming in had surcharges. You know, there were sometimes a few $100s up to a few $1,000s per container. I'm just wondering, Olivia or Bilal, who, you know, you also import containers from around the world, did you see any of those surcharges? And the other question I would ask is, did you pass any of that on to the consumer? Did you absorb it? How did you sort of deal with that? What's sort of your policy in terms of some of the extra logistical charges that came?
All right, I'll take a first go at this. So what we noticed is, I wouldn't say the surcharges were the extreme costs that affected us. It was finding, you know, initially all the containers got stuck in China, right? So finding freight prices that were at least close to what we used to buy, because you know, all our prices were Ex Works before, was a nightmare. And so no, all our products arrived as time went by, more and more expensive. But obviously in a time like this, when, you know, the situation, everyone is suffering, it's not the time you could pass that on to your clients. However, we've seen from suppliers, some try to pass that on to us. I think it depends on how much is your product needed and again, your relationship, right? So if your product is a commodity that, you know, if you don't buy it, someone else will, then I think everyone pass it on. But if your product is a product which is actually not something that they really require, they have other options and so on. So I think it's all about that. It also depends on the relationship. It's a mix, but I mean, costs of freight had gone up.
Yeah, one thing that I'll add to that, one lesson learned on our side is, like you said, for a period of time, all of the containers are stuck in China. So just getting, you know, refrigerated containers to pick up milk, for example, in Europe and bring it here, you couldn't even book a container. You know, it was just all, you know, they were all taken up. So one thing that we did do, or a lesson learned, is we started pre-booking containers for the next, when we heard about a milk shortage and working with our 3PL logistics provider, they said pre-book your containers for the next 3 to 4 months. So what it ended up doing is forcing us to forecast that, hey, we'll need 20 containers this month, 30 containers this month, or, you know, whatever number. And we pre-booked them to try and get the equipment. Now, sometimes we didn't get the equipment every time, but it increased our chances of doing that. I think the second thing that all of you guys said is we also increased our buffers. So where we would keep 2 weeks of stock, we doubled it. You know, we started keeping 4 or 5 weeks on stock. And I think everything also depends, right? I mean, if it's as you said, if it's a fast moving product, it's a necessity item, you know, there's less risk involved in stocking up. If it's not a necessity type item, a slow moving product, you're going to manage your risk. So every item, you have to look at every product as its own.
But you also have to look at in the case of Izu and Olivia, they will buy what they need, and I don't think they would stock up for more than 1 week at a time, right? But in the case of, you know, you and me and Dinesh, the hard call is freight going to be delayed? Because we've seen a lot of, particularly if you're doing air freight, we've seen a lot of times where it got canceled, or in terms of sea freight, they changed the program and now it's going to take another 2 weeks to arrive. So obviously the first instinct is double your supply, you know, just in case something gets delayed, you're always on the safe side. But the thing is, you have to couple that with the demand. And that was the biggest. I think all of us used to wake up every day and read all the 3 different news channels here on, like, are we opening up today? Right? Is today going to
be the national
Arabian business, right? So
yeah, Arabian business especially.
Going through that was it was kind of like, you know, you're playing roulette. It's either, you know, you're double down on your stocks were going to be good, or it was the reason why you'd be just that much closer to bankruptcy.
No, and I think that's a really good point, Bilal. I mean, demand planning is really what it's all about. It can, as we all know, can make or break your business. So I'm just curious. I'd love to go around and hear, you know, Olivia, how do you demand plan right now? I mean, I know you have some historical data, which is always, I think, the lowest risk, but in today's day and age, with so many macro factors changing around every day and so many government announcements, depending on what, you know, media outlet you go to, how do you guys demand plan? What are kind of the key factors that you're looking at right now when you forecast?
So obviously it's quite impossible to have a 100% amazing forecast, but we do spend a lot of time on it. So of course we look at historical growth from previous years during this particular time. And then there's obviously the seasonal, which Dubai is extremely affected by, which again is going to be a bit of a mystery this year because we don't know what's going to happen this summer. Are people going to be going or not going? But I think, you know, we have a subscription business. So at the end of the day, we have numbers live on our system at any point in time in terms of, you know, how many people are still attached to us in a way. And that's going to drive our forecast a lot. But it's definitely a bit of a hit and miss. What we have done is, with this relationship with the suppliers, is we provide like an estimated forecast. We can give that 4 weeks in advance.
How far out?
We work, you know, towards
how far out is your subscription right now? Like, how far out is your subscription? Do you buy 3 months at a time, 1 week at a time? I mean, I'm just curious.
It's week on week. It's just a weekly payment, and you can.
So you know a week ahead of time.
So we would know about 4 or 5 days before delivery, 3, 4, 5 days before delivery.
Is there an opportunity to increase or offer an incentive for a longer subscription to give you a little bit more visibility?
So to be honest, so far it's not what people want. People want to be flexible. So of course there's, we could probably, try to somehow lock it to us, but I think, as long as we listen to what our customers want and try to provide exactly what they want, that's much better than having to lock people down just for our own purposes. So.
Yeah, I think every business has its own type of demand planning formula. I can tell you that in our situation, what we ended up doing is that the day Corona really hit in a big way and the government started shutting things down, we very quickly did a survey. So we said, hey, we sat on our demand planning meetings once a month. It's one of the most important meetings in the company because we got to forecast 90 to 120 days out for milk supply, not just here, but in 10 countries. So we sat down and we launched a survey. So we went to a couple moms groups, we did Facebook polling, we called people, and we talked to about 400 people in the region. And we asked them a couple things. We said one, because we noticed one factor was forward buying, or you could also call it panic buying during the height. So we asked people, how much are they forward buying? And what we noticed is that at the peak, it ranged. Some people were forward buying between 2 and 6 weeks. So we had to say, okay, let's take our consumption rates and multiply that either somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks. However, forward buying doesn't help you, right? Because if someone buys 6 weeks of stock, they're not going to buy for another 5 weeks, right? So the second question we surveyed and asked them on a simple poll was, how has your consumption increased in the home? And what we noticed from our data is that consumption was averaging around 1 to 1.5 meals in the house, went to 3.5. So actually they were having all their meals at home because you had to, but they were eating more, right? So that was the second bullet point on consumption that helped us in doing ours. And then the last question we asked them is, what's your perception of when the lockdown will end? And then we took, from that poll of 400 people, we took those 3 factors, and then it helped us kind of demand plan very quickly when we didn't know, because there just wasn't a lot of data available.
What we noticed is that people's situations changed really quickly. So somebody might be really secure this week and next week they're out of job. So we've seen this happen as well. So I think it's it's been really quite tricky.
Yeah, no, it is an art. Izu, in the fine dining space, how do you guys deal with demand planning now? What's sort of your way of forecasting how much you have to buy and stuff, or are you kind of fixed because they're all fresh foods?
I mean, with the restaurant industry, you can't forecast what you're going to have even tomorrow because people will cancel, people will change their mind. So it's one of these industries that you have to always be on your toes. Keep looking at how to reutilize or use products in different ways. So you give yourself the flexibility. Like we've got a fish counter, which basically is a market. Whatever we get, we put there. So it's not that we're gonna always have sea bass or we're gonna always have this. It's whatever we can get in the market, and we put it there and we sell it. So I mean, this situation with the COVID, sometimes there's no data to help you to see into the future. You just have to believe in and just basically make guesstimations that things will happen or what's going to happen.
So, Chef, in your space, can you adapt your menu from a day-to-day basis based on what's available in the market? Is that something that you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always had a very simple way of looking at restoration in the sense that it has to be flexible. It's like basically we print the menus in-house. And because we print the menus in-house, we can change today for lunchtime. And this is the kind of, you build your business so you become flexible. So you can go with, it's not laminated or sent to the printers. When you did that, then you can't keep telling people, oh, we don't have this on the menu, we don't have that on the menu. So we have I mean, this way I always create all my restaurant is to be able to change my mind today. I can change the whole menu today if I want to, but I have to get the ingredients in. So this is.
So have you noticed any differences? Like, let's say pre-COVID, I'm just curious, how often would you change your dinner menu? And post-COVID, how often are you changing your dinner menu? Has it increased, or is it the same relatively, or I'm just curious?
It's the same, because for us, I mean, if we don't have the product, we don't put it on. As simple as
Okay,
that.
okay.
We just reprint the menus, and then just start up again. So that's where in our industry, it's impossible to forecast what you're going to use or what you're going to buy. The only thing is just a fish order where you're getting it from different countries. Nowadays, the suppliers don't carry extra stock. So if you run out, you run out. And we've had actually the last week or so where we had hardly any fish. So it was a bit stuck. So, but at the end of the day, you sell other things. So in the restaurant industry, if you plan it well, you can maneuver with the changing of the times.
Okay. And Chef Izu, I got a question through the Q&A. Someone was asking that, during the COVID time, there was a lot of restaurants that went on to home deliveries. They switched over to home deliveries. And some of them delivered just within a certain radius, okay, and they wouldn't deliver outside of that radius. And obviously some of them delivered, all over. What do you, I know Gaia wasn't doing deliveries, but from your knowledge of the business, why do you think some of those restaurants are just delivering within a certain radius? And why do you think some of the restaurants like yours chose just not to deliver at all?
I mean, there's two ways to look at it. It's about preserving the quality, because at the end of the day, if you try and deliver a food that is eaten in a restaurant, which is cooked and served in a restaurant, it's like literally there's no waiting there, or there's no transportation. And imagine transporting that to another destination. Of course, the quality will go down, and then you have a different look of that restaurant, or the basically the reputation of that restaurant. And Gaia, I mean, at the end of the day, we did, even Karine, we didn't choose to go on to delivery. We got on to delivery later on because we thought about it. We looked at the areas that we can maximize what we're doing and bring what we do to a certain limit to the people's home. Gaia we chose because it is a certain standing in the community of quality, and we didn't do enough study to be able to go into that realm, into that division of, because it's a different area of business when you're delivery and when you're a restaurant. You can't quickly do it the other way. I know some of the competitors did, and some of them did well, but overall, you miss the experience, because you go to a restaurant to get an experience, to get a theater kind of experience. It's not just food you can buy. You can get to the supermarket, you can order it, but you don't get the same experience when you go to a restaurant. So, but I am working on, with the whole situation, I'm working on a different platform where it's logistically target for delivery, just for delivery, using the same format or the same kind of, underbelly of what I know how to do in a restaurant in a delivery format. So there is something coming soon. I can't let you, okay. I can't tell you everything.
Interesting. Hey, I just had a direct message question. I'm gonna send this one, Bilal, to your way. And it's kind of back to the demand planning, which again is a little bit of a crystal ball, question. And Bilal, I can picture you with the crystal ball. I can picture you, looking at the crystal ball and coming up with the answer. But, people look at historical data, right? And there's some seasonality that we've learned. Summers are sometimes down 30%. Christmas, is down. It's high, back to school. There are different things in different sectors. But there's also all this macro data that we're hearing about in the news, Emirates Airlines, or, these big changes in employment. How do you balance between that and your hard data when you're doing demand planning for parts of your business?
Good question. So try that, and then try doing that geographically to like all over the world, really. So it's like we take the data from last year. Okay, I'm going to give you one example for the UAE. We look at normally the summer months, and for us, we have high seasonality in Eid, and Eid keeps going backwards, right? So this year we'll have a Eid in July, and last year it was in August. So we would first allocate, the normal demand we'd have for Eid in the month it's going to occur. And then we would say, okay, how much of the population is leaving? How much, for example, we have products that, people who live here consume, and we have products that tourists normally buy. So again, we would look at, there are no tourists coming in right now during the summer. And the people who live here, a lot of them aren't going to travel this summer. At least that's ours. So we put 80% would stay, 20% and so on. And then we calculate what we believe the demand is going to be. You take that, you add a buffer of around 10% extra. And then you have what we call our demand for this year, or forecast for this year. But then that forecast is revised literally every 2 weeks. So we allow for a continuous revision of the forecast. It doesn't normally play too much. It's not too different from what we put in. It's again, plus or minus, but it allows us to quickly move on future supplies. So if we see we've overstocked, we contact suppliers and say, slow down shipments. If we see we've understocked, then we call them up and do some air shipments.
Cool, good, thanks. Dinesh, on your side, I mean, what are some of the demand planning rules of thumb that you've learned from the situation and that you go through when you have say a forecasting meeting right now? What are some of the key factors you're looking at? And I would like to think, because you have very close consumer data from your stores, you can see a lot of things that maybe we can't. So what do you put into it? And then my second question is, how do you see the summer right now? Because I mean, from a manufacturer's, from a brand's perspective, again, 30% was kind of the dip we used to see for summer months in July. But now we don't know. People might be here, because they're not going to take that holiday, or they're worried about coming back. So two-part question, Dinesh. What do you put in your demand planning? What are sort of the top factors? And how do you see the summer dip this summer?
Yeah, I mean, so before, I mean, over the last, obviously the panic buying happened in the beginning, but retail sales were kind of quite encouraging even beyond that, because people were sitting at home more, people were cooking at home more. I've kind of noted, I've been tracking last week's retail sales, and there weren't anything too exciting. So this has just kind of made me kind of deduce. And I know it's a time of, that third week of the month, it's people's salaries are a little bit, they've kind of utilized most of it. But I do reckon there's a sort of correlation of people kind of going back, eating out as well, and not just necessarily spending so much time at home. So I think look, going for, and it was normally around the third week of June, the summer holidays would start breaking up, or people would start, using up whatever was in their pantry, whatever was in their freezer before they head out for the summer, So this is obviously not really going to happen going forward. I'm
just curious, before you get to the summer question, in terms of end of month, towards the end of someone using up their paycheck, what do you see as a dip, sort of the last week of the month, in terms of sales versus maybe your baseline? I'm just curious.
Only about 10%, to be honest. It's not huge.
Okay. Did you see a 10% increase in the first week of the month?
I would say roughly about that much, yeah.
Okay. So it balances out eventually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last week and the beginning of the month. But no, I think for us, I mean, look, the reason why you keep a healthy buffer of inventory in our business is for demand. It's for demand and supply shocks, because you don't know when you don't know when you could have supply issues. You don't know when you could have spikes in your demand. So I think our business is fairly reactive. Of course, we always try to keep, ascertain to optimum levels of inventory, for not to our cash flow position. But I think for us, even if we get it wrong by 5 or 10% either way, it won't really impact our sales. It might just only impact future orders or inventory kind of shrinking. I don't anticipate we would go through mass overstocks or out of stock. In terms of where do I kind of, I don't think that 30% dip will be there, like you mentioned, Mustafa, but I would anticipate, I mean, just this morning on the radio, they mentioned that something like the UAE's GDP, I think it's close to about 15% comes from travel and tourism. So, I mean, without a shadow of doubt, you are going to see, it's all a domino effect in terms of the economy. So without a shadow of doubt, people will be losing their jobs this summer. And it's not like, it's not like somebody who loses their job can just become an Uber driver for a couple of months. We have visa restrictions here. If somebody loses their job, unless they get something else very fast, they have to leave the country. So, yeah, I mean, I think it'll only be come September where we kind of realize the base, but we might see the lead up to that base come July, August.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's going to definitely be a challenge.
July, August, base, for definitely August will be very similar to September.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks. Okay, hey guys, we're going to wrap it up right now. We're just hitting the end of our hour. What I wanted to do is go around and just do any final comments. And I thought, if you were to give one piece of advice in terms of supply chain to our peers in our industry, what would that one piece of advice be? Bilal, I'm going to start with you, and then we're going to go around.
Relationships. I think a lot of companies went down that shouldn't have, and a lot of things could have been resolved just by having solid relationships, whether it's within the client side or on the supplier side. I think that's what helped us a lot, and I think it did the same for others.
All right, cool. Izu? Izu, you got to unmute.
Yes, I was going to say, I completely agree with Bilal. It's all about the relationship and partnership. You cannot believe that you can do this alone, or you have the divine right to win by yourself. You can't. Everything is interconnected, and the relationship that you built and the relationship that you build are the things that are going to help you to carry through. And also, you have to have a flexibility in how you do things. That we're entering into uncharted kind of waters, in the sense that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So you can plan as much as you want, but it's the relationships that you build that will help you to change and be flexible and seeing yourself through to, in the right condition to the next step.
Great. Olivia?
So I think maybe to add to that, maybe build a landscape of suppliers, review those suppliers' capacity, capability, and keep that very close to you so you have options, flexibility.
Okay. Din, final words before we wrap it up.
We touched on this, but there's two elements in all of our organizations, and probably most organizations, that are kind of common throughout and are kind of relevant throughout. And that is logistics, because it's at every single angle and every element of your business. And the second is finance, and they both intertwine very well. I think it's very important to stay financially healthy. I think by staying financially healthy, you're kind of ensuring, a sort of level of tranquility in your supply chain and the logistics as well, whether it's kind of been, whether it's kind of having, a large liability to a supplier or to a customer, these things kind of all kind of tie in. So I would say balance in both these elements is really important.
All right, great, thanks. Look, I would say our big takeaway is don't be afraid to ask in terms of demand planning. So like I said, we were really interested in the data that we got when we asked our consumers and frankly our buyers. And that helped us, I think, de-risk our demand planning to get some more input points. But listen, thank you guys all for participating in our last webinar. I think on today's call, I think the demand planning tips were very valuable. And I think also the importance of having flexibility in your supply chain, which, could mean better communication with your suppliers, working to ensure that you've got flexible credit, and also continuing the communication with all the buyers and suppliers on the supply chain. So thank you guys, everyone, for participating. Just one FYI, on next week, we have another panel, slightly different angle called Koita Kids Talk, which I'll be hosting with some other folks. On that panel, we're going to have Dr. Sarah Ramsey, who's a famed child psychologist, Lucy Bruce, who's the founder of Homegrown Nursery, and then we've got a celebrity, Chris Fade, who is a Virgin Radio talk show host, a friend of a lot of folks on the panel, and also a father of two. So we're going to be talking about managing kids through this pandemic and our lessons learned. Anyways, thanks everyone for your time today. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you next week.